The glass door swung open with such force that it rattled the Venetian blinds, and every head in the reception area turned toward the little girl standing in the doorway. Her white sandals scuffed with dirt, her yellow dress wrinkled and damp with sweat. This was 1970, Tampa, Florida, a city where boardrooms still belonged to men in gray suits, where secretaries were called girls no matter their age, and where a child appearing alone in the executive suite of Palmetto Manufacturing could only mean one thing: chaos. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark hair hung in 2 uneven braids, one ribbon missing entirely. She clutched a worn canvas purse, far too large for her small hands, and her chest heaved with the effort of running. Behind the reception desk, Mrs. Cordelia Banks froze mid-keystroke on her IBM Selectric, the mechanical hum suddenly the only sound in the room. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Banks began, her voice careful. "Are you lost?" The girl shook her head, brown eyes wide and darting. "My mama," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She's outside. She fell. I need to get someone." Before anyone could respond, a door marked "Executive Offices, Authorized Personnel Only" opened, and Victor Castellano emerged, irritation already etched across his features. At 43, Castellano had built Palmetto Manufacturing from a single textile shop into a regional powerhouse. He had no patience for disorder, and disorder was exactly what this child represented. "What is going on out here?" His voice carried the clipped authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Mrs. Banks stood. "Mr. Castellano, this little girl says her mother—" "Is this some kind of joke?" Castellano cut her off, his gaze sweeping from the child to the closed interview room door across the hall. He'd been conducting interviews all morning for the new quality control supervisor position. Candidates paraded in one after another, most of them disappointingly unqualified. "Where are her parents?" "Sir, she says her mother collapsed outside." But Castellano wasn't listening. He was staring at the canvas purse in the girl's hands, recognition flickering across his face. He'd seen that purse less than 20 minutes ago, resting on the lap of his 10 o'clock interview. Elena Morales, a widow with an impressive resume and a quiet dignity that had actually impressed him despite his skepticism about hiring a woman for the role. The air in the reception area seemed to thicken. "Your mother," Castellano said slowly, his tone shifting. "Is her name Elena?" The girl nodded, tears now spilling down her cheeks. "She told me to wait in the car, but she didn't come back. And when I went to look, she was on the ground by the fountain, and she won't wake up. And I didn't know what to do. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. And if this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next is going to leave you speechless." Castellano moved fast for a man who typically delegated physical tasks. He was out the door before Mrs. Banks could reach for the phone, the girl scrambling to keep up with his long strides. The Florida heat hit them like a wall, thick, wet, suffocating. The scent of magnolia and car exhaust hung in the air, and beneath it, something sharper. Fear. They found Elena Morales exactly where her daughter said she'd be, slumped against the base of the ornamental fountain in the building's courtyard. Her navy blue interview suit was rumpled, one shoe kicked off. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. "Call an ambulance," Castellano barked over his shoulder. He knelt beside Elena, his mind racing through half-remembered first aid from his Navy days. The girl dropped to her knees on the other side of her mother, small hands reaching for Elena's face. "Mama, please wake up," she whispered. "Mama, I got help. You have to wake up now." Elena's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Rosalind," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I told you, stay in the car." "You were gone too long," Rosalind said, and there was something in her voice, a forced calm, a maturity beyond her years, that made Castellano's chest tighten. He looked down at Elena's wrist and saw the medical alert bracelet for the first time, the engraving too small to read in the harsh sunlight. But he didn't need to read it. Something about this woman's face, about the way she looked at her daughter with such fierce, protective love, even as she struggled for breath. It triggered a memory he'd spent 5 years trying to bury. Cleveland Clinic, 1965. His younger sister, Maria, 17 years old and dying of kidney failure. The experimental transplant program. The anonymous donor who'd made the impossible possible. He'd never learned the donor's name. The hospital had been adamant about privacy. But he'd been given one detail, burned into his memory. The donor was a 22-year-old woman from Tampa, a recent widow who'd insisted on helping, despite her own financial struggles. Castellano's hands began to shake. "Mrs. Morales," he said, his voice strange even to his own ears. "Do you have a surgical scar? Left side?" Elena's eyes found his, and in them he saw recognition of a different kind. Not of his face, but of what he was asking. What he was beginning to understand. She nodded once. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, growing closer. But before help could arrive, before questions could be asked or explanations given, Rosalind Morales looked up at the man kneeling across from her and said 5 words that would change everything. "My mama saves people's lives." And Victor Castellano realized that the woman bleeding into his company's courtyard, the woman he'd been, prepared to politely reject for a job she was overqualified for, was the reason his sister was alive. What do you do when you discover that the stranger you're about to dismiss is the person who gave you back everything that mattered? The ambulance arrived in a screech of rubber and wailing sirens, and the courtyard exploded into controlled chaos, paramedics dropping to their knees beside Elena, radios crackling with medical codes, Rosalind being gently but firmly moved aside by a woman in a crisp white uniform. The question now wasn't whether Elena Morales would survive the next 10 minutes. It was whether Victor Castellano could live with himself if he'd never known the truth. He stood back as the paramedics worked, watching their efficient movements. Blood pressure cuff, oxygen mask, IV line threading into Elena's arm with practiced precision. Mrs. Banks had appeared with a clipboard and was attempting to gather information, but Rosalind seemed unable to speak, her small body rigid with terror. "I know her medical history," Castellano heard himself say. The lead paramedic, a weathered man with kind eyes, looked up sharply. "Your family?" Castellano hesitated. What was he? A grateful stranger, a debtor who could never repay what he owed. "I'm someone who needs to make sure she gets the best care available." Inside the ambulance, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look simultaneously too real and utterly surreal, Castellano sat across from Rosalind, while Elena drifted in and out of consciousness. The girl hadn't let go of her mother's hand, and Castellano noticed the way Elena's fingers tightened around her daughter's whenever awareness returned. An anchor, a lifeline, a promise. "How long has she been sick?" he asked Rosalind gently. The girl's voice was small but steady. "She gets tired sometimes. The doctor said her body works harder than other people's because..." She stopped, as if uncertain whether she should continue. "Because she only has one kidney," Castellano finished. Rosalind's eyes widened. "How did you know?" The ambulance took a sharp turn, and Castellano gripped the metal bench to steady himself. Through the small window, he could see Tampa sliding past in snapshots. Palm trees, traffic lights, the glint of the bay in the distance. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother's sacrifice had rippled across time and space to save a stranger's life? That generosity had consequences, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "Your mother did something very brave 5 years ago," he said. "She helped save someone's life, someone very important to me." Understanding dawned slowly across Rosalind's face. "Your sister," she whispered. "Mama told me about the lady. She said sometimes God asks us to share what we have, even when we don't have very much." The simplicity of it, the clean, uncomplicated faith, hit Castellano harder than he'd expected. Elena Morales had been a widow at 22, struggling to raise an infant daughter alone, and she'd given away a piece of herself to save a stranger's sibling. Meanwhile, he'd spent the morning judging job candidates by the firmness of their handshakes and the crispness of their resumes. The shame of it settled into his bones. At Tampa General Hospital, the emergency room smelled of antiseptic and instant coffee, and the linoleum floors squeaked beneath nervous feet. Elena was wheeled away immediately, leaving Rosalind and Castellano in a waiting area decorated with faded posters about hand-washing and the dangers of smoking. A television mounted in the corner played a soap opera that no one was watching. "Are you going to stay?" Rosalind asked, looking up at him with those two old eyes. Castellano realized he'd been planning to leave, to return to the office, to the stack of resumes, to the comfortable predictability of quarterly reports and production schedules. But something had shifted in the space between the courtyard and this sterile waiting room. Some invisible thread had been pulled, and he couldn't unspool it even if he wanted to. "I'm staying," he said. They waited in silence for nearly an hour. Castellano watched Rosalind pull items from her mother's purse one by one, arranging them on the chair beside her with careful reverence. A wallet held together with a rubber band, a compact mirror with a cracked face, a rosary with worn wooden beads, a folded piece of paper that Rosalind smoothed flat with small, precise movements. "What's that?" Castellano asked. "Mama's interview questions," Rosalind said. "She practiced them every night for 2 weeks. She really wanted this job." Castellano took the paper when Rosalind offered it, his heart sinking as he scanned Elena's careful handwriting. "Why do you want to work at Palmetto Manufacturing? What are your greatest strengths? How do you handle pressure and deadlines?" Beside each question, Elena had written detailed answers, crossing out words and rewriting them, searching for the perfect phrasing. In the margins were small notes. "Smile more. Make eye contact. Don't apologize for being a woman." He'd been prepared to reject her, not because she was unqualified. Her resume showed 3 years of quality control experience at a textile plant in Orlando, excellent references, even a commendation for identifying a defect that saved the company thousands in recalls. He'd been prepared to reject her because hiring a woman for a supervisory position would mean dealing with skeptical male employees, with whispers about affirmative action and special treatment, with the uncomfortable reality that progress required discomfort. And Elena Morales had known all of this. She'd anticipated every objection, prepared for every doubt, and she'd come to that interview ready to fight for a chance she'd already earned twice over. "Mr. Castellano?" He looked up to find a doctor approaching, young and efficient-looking, in green scrubs. "Are you here with Elena Morales?" "Yes. How is she?" "Stable for now. She's severely anemic and dehydrated, and her remaining kidney is under significant stress. We're going to keep her for observation, run some tests." The doctor's expression softened. "She's been pushing herself too hard. Her body can't sustain the kind of physical demands most people take for granted. Because she'd given away half her filtration system to save a stranger. Because generosity had a price. And Elena Morales had been paying it every day for 5 years." "Can I see her?" Rosalind asked, standing up with the sudden urgency of a child who'd been brave for too long. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Room 217, but just for a few minutes." Castellano followed them down the corridor, past rooms filled with beeping machines and hushed conversations. Elena was propped up in bed when they entered, an IV line snaking from her arm, her face still pale, but her eyes clear and focused on her daughter. "Rosie," she said, and the relief in her voice was everything. Rosalind climbed onto the bed with the practiced ease of a child who'd done this before, curling against her mother's side. Castellano hung back, suddenly aware that he was intruding on something private and sacred. But Elena's gaze found his, and what he saw there wasn't gratitude or expectation. It was simple recognition. One human being seeing another clearly, stripped of pretense and social performance. "Mr. Castellano," she said quietly, "I'm sorry I disrupted your day." And that's when he understood the full weight of what was happening. Elena Morales was apologizing to him, even now, even here, because she still believed she was the supplicant and he was the gatekeeper. How do you tell someone that they've saved your life twice, once through sacrifice, and once through showing you who you've become? Victor Castellano had built an empire on the principle of fair exchange. Goods for payment, labor for wages, risk for reward. But standing in that hospital room, he realized there were debts that couldn't be balanced with contracts or paychecks. Elena Morales was trying to sit up straighter, to compose herself despite the IV line and the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "You don't need to apologize," Castellano said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Mrs. Morales, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Elena's hand tightened protectively around Rosalind's shoulder. "All right. In 1965, did you donate a kidney at Cleveland Clinic to a 17-year-old girl named Maria Castellano?" The silence that followed was broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the distant sound of a PA system calling for Dr. Morrison. Elena's expression shifted, not with surprise, but with something deeper, a kind of resigned understanding, as if she'd always known this moment would come eventually. "Yes," she said simply. Rosalind looked between them, confusion and curiosity warring on her young face. "Mama, what's he talking about? Remember when I told you about the time I went to Ohio?" Elena's voice was soft, meant only for her daughter. "When you were just a baby, and Abuela watched you for 2 weeks? You said you were helping someone." "I was." Elena's gaze returned to Castellano. "Your sister, Maria, is she?" "She's alive," Castellano said, and the words came out like a confession. "She's in Jacksonville now, married, teaching high school biology. She has 2 children." He paused, emotion threatening to crack through his careful control. "She has a life because of you." The weight of revelation pressed down on the small hospital room. Outside, Tampa continued its indifferent rhythm, traffic flowing, palm fronds rustling in the Gulf breeze. The ordinary world spinning on while three lives realigned around a single point of connection. "How did you find me?" Elena asked. "I didn't. You came to me." Castellano moved closer to the bed, needing her to understand. "When you walked into my office this morning for that interview, I had no idea. I didn't recognize your name. The hospital kept everything anonymous. But when Rosalind said you'd collapsed, when I saw the medical bracelet," he shook his head. "5 years ago, the hospital told me the donor was a young widow from Tampa, 22 years old, recently bereaved. They said she'd insisted on proceeding with the donation despite her own difficult circumstances." "My husband had just died," Elena said quietly. "Car accident. 6 months after Rosie was born. The insurance company found a reason not to pay out the policy, and I was drowning in medical bills and funeral costs." She looked down at her daughter, smoothing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "When the clinic called looking for donors, they offered compensation, enough to keep us afloat for a year, maybe 2, but that's not why I did it." "Then why?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memory. "My husband, Roberto, he used to say that grief makes you one of 2 things, smaller or bigger. It either closes you down, makes you hoard what little you have left, or it cracks you open and shows you that everyone is carrying something heavy." She met Castellano's gaze directly. "I chose bigger. I chose to believe that my pain could purchase someone else's joy, that losing Roberto didn't have to be meaningless if I could make meaning from it. Love traded for life." Castellano felt something fracture inside his chest. He'd spent 5 years being grateful in the abstract. Grateful to medicine, to science, to the anonymous benevolence of strangers. But gratitude without a face, without a name, without cost, was just another comfortable emotion. This was different. This was standing in front of the person who'd bled for your family and realizing you'd almost sent her away without a second thought. "The job," he said abruptly. "The quality, control supervisor position. It's yours if you want it." Elena's expression hardened, and for the first time, Castellano saw steel beneath the exhaustion. "I don't want charity, Mr. Castellano." "It's not charity. You were the most qualified candidate I interviewed this morning." "Then why?" She stopped, understanding dawning. "You were going to reject me anyway, before all this, before you knew." There was no point in lying. "Yes, because I'm a woman." "Because it would be complicated," Castellano corrected, then immediately hated himself for the semantic dodge. "Yes, because you're a woman, and because I told myself that complicated wasn't worth the return on investment." Rosalind had been following the conversation with the intense focus of a child who understands more than adults give her credit for. "That's not fair," she said, her voice small but firm. "Mama works harder than anybody. She never complains, and she always does her best. And you should want her because she's good, not because she gave you her kidney." Out of the mouths of children comes uncomfortable truth. Castellano knelt down so he was eye level with Rosalind. "You're absolutely right, and I'm going to fix it. But first, I need your mother to get better, because I don't hire people who collapse from exhaustion before they can even finish their interview." Despite everything, Elena laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Mr. Castellano?" "Victor," he interrupted. "I think we're past formalities." "Victor," Elena amended, and the name sounded strange in her soft accent, vowels rounded in ways his own family no longer bothered with. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need to know this is real, that you're offering me this job because you believe I can do it." not because you feel obligated. You want honesty? Always. Right now, in this moment, I can't separate the obligation from the admiration. You saved my sister's life, and that creates a debt I can never repay. But I also read your resume, Mrs. Morales. I saw the commendation from your previous employer. I saw the recommendation letters that described you as meticulous, innovative, and unflappable under pressure. So yes, I feel obligated. And yes, I believe you're the right person for this job. Can both things be true? Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for insincerity or pity. She must have found neither, because her posture finally relaxed. Both things can be true, she agreed softly. The doctor reappeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Morales, I need to discuss your treatment plan. If your guests could step outside. I'm not going anywhere, Castellano said, surprising himself with his vehemence. Whatever she needs, whatever treatment, whatever specialists, I'm covering it. All of it. Victor, Elena began, but he held up a hand. This isn't negotiable. You can pay me back with excellent work once you're on your feet. Consider it an advance against your salary. I haven't accepted the job yet. Then accept it now. A smile played at the corners of Elena's mouth, the first real one he'd seen. You're very pushy for someone who almost rejected me. I've been told I overcompensate when I'm wrong. Outside the window, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the Gulf, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in Jacksonville, Maria Castellano was probably picking up her children from school, living a life she'd been given back by a stranger's sacrifice. And here in Tampa, the circle was closing, the debt being acknowledged, if not fully paid. But as Castellano watched Rosalind curl tighter against her mother, as he saw the exhaustion and determination warring in Elena's expression, he understood that this was only the beginning. Some debts took a lifetime to honor, and some grace came disguised as interruption. The hospital kept Elena for 3 days, and Victor Castellano visited every afternoon with the discipline of a man keeping a vigil. He told himself it was practical. Elena would need to understand the company's operations before she started, so why not brief her during her recovery? But the truth was more complicated, woven through with guilt and wonder and the unsettling realization that his entire life had been touched by someone whose name he'd never known. On the second day, he brought Maria. His sister arrived at the hospital entrance at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, driving up from Jacksonville in the same green Chevrolet she'd bought with her first teaching paycheck. Castellano watched her park, watched her check her reflection in the rearview mirror with the same nervous gesture she'd had since childhood, and felt his throat tighten. She doesn't know I'm coming, does she? Maria asked as they walked through the hospital corridors, past the nurses' station, where staff nodded recognition at Castellano's now familiar face. I wanted it to be a surprise. Victor, what if she doesn't want to see me? What if this is too much? He stopped walking, turning to face his sister fully. At 32, Maria had grown into a woman of quiet strength, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands showing the faint chemical stains of someone who spent her days teaching teenagers about mitosis and cellular respiration. But in her eyes, he could still see traces of the frightened 17-year-old who'd been told her kidneys were failing, that without a transplant she had months to live, that finding a donor was like finding a needle in a haystack dipped in gold. She gave you life, Castellano said simply. She deserves to see what she created. Room 217 had become a small island of domesticity in the sterile hospital landscape. Rosalind had covered the bedside table with drawings, horses and houses and elaborate flowers rendered in crayon. Someone had brought a portable radio, and it played softly in the corner, some AM station cycling through hits by the Jackson 5 and Creedence Clearwater Revival. Elena was sitting up, considerably more alert than she'd been 2 days prior, reading a book to Rosalind about a mouse who dreamed of being an astronaut. She looked up when they entered, and Castellano watched confusion give way to curiosity as she registered the woman standing beside him. "Elena Morales," he said, his voice formal with the weight of the moment. "This is my sister, Maria." The book slipped from Elena's hands. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The radio continued its tinny performance, and somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. But inside that room, time seemed to fold in on itself, past and present collapsing into a single point of recognition. Maria moved first, crossing to the bed with tears already streaming down her face. "I've wanted to thank you for 5 years," she said, her voice breaking. "Every morning when I wake up, every time I see my children, every single day I get to live. It's because of you." Elena was crying too now, silent tears that tracked down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd meet you," she whispered. "They said it would all be anonymous. It was supposed to be." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, and Castellano was struck by how similar the two women looked in that moment. Both small-framed and dark-haired, both carrying themselves with a dignity that had been forged through suffering. "But my brother is stubborn, and apparently fate wanted us to know each other." Rosalind watched this exchange with solemn interest, and Castellano realized the girl was seeing her mother transformed. No longer just Mama who worked too hard and got too tired, but someone who'd altered the course of another person's existence. A hero made of flesh and sacrifice. "Tell me about your life," Elena said, reaching out to take Maria's hand. "Please. I want to know what became of you." And so Maria told her story, painting it in careful detail. The transplant surgery that had saved her life, the slow recovery that had taken nearly a year. Meeting her husband Thomas during her freshman year at the University of Florida. He'd been a graduate student in education, patient and kind, with a laugh that could fill a room. Their wedding in '68. The birth of their daughter, Carolina, 2 years later. The son, Michael, who'd arrived just last spring. "I teach biology," Maria said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Which feels appropriate given that I quite literally owe my life to science and human generosity. My students think I'm too passionate about the kidney unit." Elena laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I think that's perfect." "What about you?" Maria asked. "Victor told me about your husband. I'm so sorry." The room's energy shifted, grief entering like an unwelcome guest. Elena's gaze drifted to Rosalind, who had climbed onto Castellano's lap and was playing with his watch clasp, giving her mother space to speak of difficult things. "Roberto was a good man," Elena said quietly. "Stubborn and proud, like most men, but good. He worked construction, long hours in the Florida heat, building other people's dreams. He wanted to give Rosie everything he never had. Stability, education, a house with a yard." She paused, collecting herself. "The accident was sudden. A drunk driver ran a red light. Roberto never saw it coming. And 6 months later, you donated your kidney," Maria said, understanding threading through her words. "While you were still grieving, while you were raising a baby alone." "I needed something to make sense," Elena said. "Roberto's death was so random, so meaningless. But this, giving you a chance to live, that had meaning. That was something I could control in a world that suddenly felt very out of control. She had transformed her anguish into grace. Castellano found himself thinking about the calculations he'd made that morning in his office, weighing Elena's qualifications against the inconvenience of progress. How small those considerations seemed now. How petty his concerns about appearances and office politics and maintaining the comfortable status quo. "I need to tell you something," Maria said, her voice taking on a more urgent quality. "When I found out I was pregnant with Carolina, the doctors weren't sure it was safe. The transplant had been successful, but pregnancy puts enormous strain on the kidneys, and there were risks." She squeezed Elena's hand tighter. "But I wanted so badly to be a mother, to create life after coming so close to losing mine. And every day of that pregnancy, every moment I felt my daughter moving inside me, I thought about you, about the sacrifice that made it all possible." Elena's tears came harder now. "You named her Carolina?" "After the Carolinas, North and South, where new beginnings are made." Maria pulled a photograph from her purse, showing a toddler with dark curls and mischievous eyes sitting on a tricycle. "She's 2.5 now, fearless and stubborn and so full of life it sometimes takes my breath away." Elena studied the photograph like it was a sacred text, and Castellano understood what she was seeing. Proof that her suffering had blossomed into joy, that her loss had purchased someone else's future, that the universe, despite its cruelties, could sometimes balance the scales in unexpected ways. "And this is Michael," Maria continued, producing another photograph. An infant, perhaps 4 months old, sleeping with tiny fists curled against his cheeks. Born March 15, 1970. Healthy and perfect and absolutely exhausting. 2 children, Elena breathed. "You have 2 children because I gave you 1 kidney. I have everything because you gave me 1 kidney." The mathematics of grace defied conventional accounting. Rosalind had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up from her perch on Castellano's lap. "Mama, does this mean Miss Maria is like our family now?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Elena and Maria looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition of a bond that transcended biology, that existed in the space between stranger and sister. "Yes," Elena said softly. "I think it does." And just like that, a family was made from sacrifice and survival, from the strange alchemy that turns tragedy into connection. But as the afternoon light slanted through the hospital window, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, Castellano knew that gratitude alone wouldn't be enough to repay what Elena Morales had given them. What came next would require something harder than thanks. It would require justice, action, and the uncomfortable work of making sure that sacrifice was honored not with words, but with opportunity. Could a job ever equal a life? Could employment balance the scales of such a debt? Elena Morales was discharged from Tampa General on a Thursday morning in late July, and by Friday afternoon she was sitting in Victor Castellano's office, reviewing the organizational charts and production reports that would define her new role at Palmetto Manufacturing. She'd insisted on starting immediately, despite the doctor's recommendations for 2 weeks of rest. "I've been resting for 3 days," she'd told Castellano when he'd suggested she take more time. "And I have bills that won't pay themselves while I sit at home recovering from my own stubbornness." Now, watching her make careful notes in the margins of a quality control manual, Castellano was reminded that gratitude could coexist with respect, that Elena Morales hadn't needed his charity, only his recognition of what she'd already earned. But the rest of Palmetto Manufacturing wasn't prepared for what that recognition would cost them. The factory floor at Palmetto smelled of machine oil and cotton dust, a scent that Castellano had grown up with. His father had started the business in the 1940s, building it from a single textile loom into a facility that now employed over 200 workers. The machinery hummed with industrial purpose, massive looms clacking in rhythmic precision, workers moving between stations with practiced efficiency. It was a world built on hierarchy and tradition, where promotions came slowly and women worked the sewing lines while men supervised the floor. Into this world walked Elena Morales on Monday morning, wearing a practical navy skirt suit and carrying a clipboard, ready to assume her role as quality control supervisor. The reaction was immediate and hostile. Frank Delaney, the outgoing supervisor, a man of 56 who'd been passed over for promotion to floor manager and had been counting on a comfortable final decade before retirement, stood in the break room surrounded by a cluster of male employees when Elena arrived for the morning shift meeting. "So it's true," Delaney said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Castellano hired a woman to tell us how to do our jobs." Elena stopped in the doorway, and Castellano, who'd been shadowing her for the first week as part of her orientation, saw her spine straighten almost imperceptibly. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the inevitable confrontation between progress and precedent. "Good morning, Mr. Delaney," Elena said, her voice level and professional. "I'm looking forward to working with you during the transition period." "Transition period," Delaney repeated, turning to his audience with theatrical disbelief. "That's corporate talk for, I'm here to replace you with someone who checks the right boxes." "I'm here," Elena said, moving further into the break room, "because I have 3 years of quality control experience, a commendation for defect identification, and a proven track record of improving production standards. My gender has nothing to do with my qualifications. Your gender has everything to do with it." Delaney's face was flushed now, anger and embarrassment mixing into something ugly. "You think Castellano would have hired you if you were just another man with a decent resume? He needed to make a statement, and you're it, a token." The break room had gone silent, every eye watching to see how this would resolve. Castellano knew he should intervene, should use his authority to shut down Delaney's insubordination. But something made him wait, made him want to see how Elena would handle this herself. She set her clipboard down on the break room table with deliberate care. "Mr. Delaney, I understand this transition is difficult for you. You've been in this role for 8 years, and you've done good work. The production records show consistent quality during your tenure." She paused, letting the acknowledgement settle. But consistency isn't the same as excellence, and Mr. Castellano has made it clear he expects excellence moving forward. "Excellence," Delaney spat. "What would you know about excellence? You probably got through your previous job by batting your eyelashes at the boss." The accusation landed like a slap, and Castellano saw Elena's hands tighten into fists at her sides. But her voice remained steady, almost gentle, the tone of someone who'd weathered worse storms than Frank Delaney's wounded pride. "I know about excellence," Elena said quietly, "because I've had to be twice as good to get half as far. I know about it because I've worked jobs where being a woman meant every mistake was proof of my gender's incompetence, and every success was dismissed as luck. I know about it because I've raised a daughter alone while holding down full-time work, and I've learned that excellence isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and doing better than you did yesterday." She picked up her clipboard again. "Now, we have a production floor to inspect, and I'd appreciate your cooperation during the transition. But if you can't provide that..." I'm sure Mr. Castellano can find you a position that better suits your abilities. It was a masterclass in professional confrontation, firm without being aggressive, acknowledging hurt while refusing to accept abuse. Castellano felt a surge of admiration that had nothing to do with kidney donations and everything to do with watching someone stand their ground against hostile territory. Delaney looked to Castellano, clearly expecting support or intervention. You going to let her talk to me like that? Mrs. Morales is your supervisor, Castellano said simply, which means you'll address her with the same respect you'd show any other person in that role. If you have concerns about the transition, you're welcome to discuss them in my office. But undermining her authority on the floor isn't acceptable. The other men in the break room shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others watching with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a social order being overturned. Change, Castellano realized, didn't come gently. It arrived like Elena Morales had, uninvited, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary. The morning inspection revealed what Elena had suspected from reviewing the production reports. Quality control at Palmetto had become perfunctory rather than rigorous. Delaney had been coasting, rubber-stamping batches without the kind of detailed examination that caught problems before they became expensive recalls. See this? Elena pointed to a bolt of fabric coming off the loom, running her fingers along a nearly invisible irregularity in the weave. This tension issue will create weak spots in the finished product. If this batch gets processed and shipped, we'll have customer complaints within 6 months. Delaney crossed his arms. That's within acceptable tolerance. Acceptable isn't excellent, Elena countered. And if we're shipping products we know will fail, we're not being honest with our customers. She flagged the batch for review, making notes on her clipboard while the loom operator, a young man named Bobby who'd been watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement at Delaney's discomfort, adjusted the tension settings. Thanks, Mrs. Morales, Bobby said quietly. I've been saying something was off with that loom for weeks, but nobody listened. I'm listening now, Elena replied. If you see something that doesn't look right, you come directly to me. Quality is everyone's responsibility. By lunch, word had spread through the factory. The new supervisor actually knew what she was doing, that she wasn't decoration or charity, that she was, in fact, better at the job than Delaney had been. Castellano watched the shift in real time, skepticism giving way to cautious respect, hostility softening into curiosity. Not everyone would come around, he knew. Some men would never accept being supervised by a woman, would never see past their own wounded pride to recognize competence. But enough people were watching, enough people were willing to give Elena a chance, that the tide was beginning to turn. In his office that afternoon, as Elena compiled her initial findings into a detailed report, Castellano poured them both coffee from the percolator he kept on his credenza. You handled Delaney well, he said. Elena looked up from her notes, exhaustion showing in the shadows under her eyes. I've had practice. Every job I've ever held, there's been a Frank Delaney. Someone who sees my presence as a personal insult rather than a professional reality. Does it ever get easier? No. She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. But you get better at recognizing that their anger isn't really about you. It's about a world that's changing faster than they know how to change with it. Wisdom earned through endurance. Castellano sat on the edge of his desk, studying the woman who'd saved his sister and was now saving his company's reputation one quality inspection at a time. I owe you an apology, he said, for almost being one of those men, for almost letting my comfort matter more than doing the right thing. Elena met his gaze directly. You're apologizing now by giving me the chance to prove myself. That's more than most people do. Outside the window, the Florida afternoon was building toward one of its spectacular thunderstorms, dark clouds massing over the bay, the air thick with the promise of rain. Somewhere in that city, Rosalind was probably sitting in summer school, practicing her multiplication tables. Maria was likely teaching teenagers about cellular respiration. The world was spinning forward, carrying with it all the small and large consequences of choices made and chances given. Your first week report, Castellano said, gesturing to her notes. What's the damage? Elena's smile was wry. You want honesty? Always. Your quality control has been failing for at least 2 years. You've been shipping substandard product and hoping customers wouldn't notice. It's only a matter of time before that catches up with you in lawsuits and lost contracts. She could have softened it, could have cushioned the blow with diplomatic language. But Elena Morales had been hired for excellence, not comfort. How do we fix it? Castellano asked. We implement new inspection protocols. We retrain the floor staff. We make quality everyone's responsibility instead of one person's afterthought. She paused. And we fire Frank Delaney. The recommendation hung in the air like a challenge. He's been with the company for 20 years, Castellano said carefully. And he's been failing at his job for at least 2 of them. Victor, I know what you're thinking. That firing him will look like retaliation. That it'll make the transition harder. But keeping him sends the message that mediocrity is acceptable as long as you've been here long enough. Is that the standard you want to set? She was right, and they both knew it. But knowing and doing existed in different universes, separated by courage and consequence. How do you build something new without destroying what came before? How do you demand excellence without crushing the people who gave you adequacy? Frank Delaney was terminated on the 15th of August, 1970, with a severance package that was more generous than he deserved, and a reference letter that praised his years of service while carefully omitting his recent failures. He didn't go quietly. This is what happens, Delaney announced to anyone who would listen in the days following his dismissal. When you let women run things. They come in with their clipboards and their college words, and suddenly loyalty doesn't matter. 20 years of my life, and I get replaced by some widow who probably slept her way into the job. The rumors spread through Tampa's manufacturing community like oil across water, whispered in union halls and break rooms, repeated over beers at the Anchor Tavern where factory workers gathered after shifts. Elena Morales was a homewrecker, a manipulator, a woman who'd used feminine wiles to seduce Victor Castellano into giving her a position she hadn't earned. The truth, of course, was irrelevant to people who needed the lie. Castellano heard the gossip secondhand, through his secretary, Mrs. Banks, through worried calls from business associates, through the careful silence of colleagues who didn't know how to address something so ugly and untrue. He wanted to issue a statement, to call a press conference, to shout from the rooftops that Elena Morales had saved his sister's life and earned her position through merit and sacrifice. But Elena herself stopped him. Don't, she said, when he suggested going public with the truth. They were in his office on a Tuesday evening, the factory quiet below them, Tampa's August heat pressing against the windows like a living thing. Don't defend me by explaining the kidney donation. That makes me the recipient of your charity, and it proves Delaney's point. That I'm only here because of special circumstances, not because I'm good at my job. But you are good at your job. Exceptional, even. Then let my work speak for itself. Castellano studied her across his desk. This woman who'd become something more complicated than an employee or a symbol of gratitude. In the 6 weeks since Elena had started at Palmetto, production quality had improved by 18%. Customer complaints had dropped to nearly zero, and 3 major contracts that had been wavering due to quality concerns had renewed with increased orders. The numbers told a story that gossip couldn't erase. But numbers didn't protect a 7-year-old girl from hearing whispers about her mother. Rosalind came home from school crying on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-September. Elena had arranged for her daughter to attend St. Catherine's Elementary, a Catholic school near the factory where the nuns were strict but kind, where Rosalind could stay for after-school care until Elena finished her shifts. Some of the older girls said things, Rosalind told her mother that evening, her voice small and hurt in ways that no child should have to experience. They said you're a bad lady who tricks men. They said their fathers talk about you at dinner and call you names. Elena held her daughter close, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. This was the cost of progress, she realized. Not just professional obstacles or workplace hostility, but the way cruelty trickled down to wound the innocent. Rosalind hadn't asked to be part of this battle, hadn't chosen to have a mother who challenged the established order. Those girls don't know me, Elena said gently, smoothing her daughter's hair. And their fathers don't know the truth. Sometimes people say cruel things because they're afraid of change, and fear makes people mean. But why do they have to be mean to you? You're good. You help people. The simplicity of a child's moral universe, good and bad, kind and cruel, with no room for the complicated gray spaces where most adults lived. Because being good doesn't always protect you from people who want to believe you're bad, Elena said. But we keep being good anyway, because that's how we prove them wrong. That night, after Rosalind finally fell asleep clutching her worn teddy bear, Elena sat at her small kitchen table and considered resignation. She could walk away from Palmetto Manufacturing, find a quieter job where her presence wouldn't generate controversy, protect her daughter from the fallout of other people's prejudice. She'd written 3 sentences of a resignation letter when the phone rang. Mrs. Morales? This is Maria Castellano. The voice on the other end was tight with controlled fury. My brother just told me what's been happening, the rumors, the harassment. I'm driving up from Jacksonville tomorrow, and we're going to handle this together. Maria, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Elena, you gave me my life. The least I can do is help you keep yours. They met at Castellano's office the next morning, Victor, Elena, and Maria, forming an unlikely war council around his conference table. Mrs. Banks had been sent to gather copies of Elena's performance reviews, production reports, and customer satisfaction surveys. The evidence of competence, quantified and documented. We need to change the narrative, Maria said, her teacher's instinct for strategy evident in the way she organized papers into precise stacks. Right now, the story is about a woman who doesn't belong. We need to make it about excellence rewarded and mediocrity exposed. How? Castellano asked. By going public. Not with the kidney donation. Elena's right that it muddies the message. But with the truth about Frank Delaney's failures and Elena's successes. Elena shook her head. That feels like retaliation. Like we're attacking him to defend me. We're not attacking him, Maria corrected. We're correcting a false narrative with facts. There's a difference between revenge and truth-telling. The plan took shape over the next hour. Castellano would give an interview to the Tampa Tribune, the city's largest newspaper, explaining the recent changes at Palmetto Manufacturing. He would discuss the quality control problems that had been discovered, the improvements implemented under Elena's supervision, and the quantifiable results that proved hiring her had been a business decision, not a political one. The article ran on the front page of the business section the following Sunday, complete with photographs of Elena on the factory floor and charts showing Palmetto's improved performance metrics. The headline read, "Tampa manufacturer proves quality has no gender." The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Dorothy Pierce, who'd been covering Tampa business for 15 years, had done her homework. She'd interviewed floor workers who praised Elena's attention to detail, contacted customers who confirmed the improvement in product quality, and even tracked down Bobby, the young loom operator who'd initially clashed with Delaney over equipment issues. "Mrs. Morales actually listens," Bobby was quoted saying. "She treats the floor workers like we know something about the machines we operate every day. Under Delaney, if you raised a concern, you got told to shut up and do your job. Under Mrs. Morales, you get thanked for caring about quality." The article also included a carefully worded paragraph about Frank Delaney's termination. Former quality control supervisor Frank Delaney was released from his position after internal audits revealed systemic failures in inspection protocols. The decision, according to Castellano, was based purely on performance metrics and had been under consideration for several months prior to Mrs. Morales' hiring. Not an attack, just facts. The response was swift and divided. Progressive voices praised Palmetto Manufacturing for judging employees by merit rather than gender. Conservative business leaders grumbled about political correctness and the erosion of traditional workplace hierarchies. And Frank Delaney, reading the article over coffee in his small apartment, realized that his narrative of victimhood had just been exposed as the self-serving fiction it was. But it was a different response that mattered most to Elena. On Monday morning, she arrived at Palmetto to find a group of women waiting outside the factory gates. Secretaries, seamstresses, line workers from other companies, some holding copies of the Tribune article, others simply wanting to see the woman who'd cracked open a door that had been closed to them for so long. "We just wanted to say thank you," one woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My daughter is studying engineering at university, and everyone tells her she's wasting her time because no one will hire a woman engineer. But seeing what you've done, seeing you succeed, it gives her hope. It gives all of us hope." Elena stood before this unexpected congregation, these women who'd been told in 1,000 small ways that their ambitions were inappropriate, their competence suspect, their presence in traditionally male spaces a disruption rather than a contribution. And she understood, finally, that this fight had never been just about her. "Don't thank me yet," Elena said, her voice carrying across the small crowd. "Thank me by being excellent at whatever you do, by refusing to accept less than you've earned, by showing up every day and doing work so good that no one can deny you deserved the opportunity." She had become, without meaning to, a symbol. But symbols, Elena was learning, were just people who refused to disappear when it would have been easier to fade away. Inside Palmetto Manufacturing, the morning shift was starting. Machines humming to life, workers clocking in, another day of production beginning under new standards of excellence. And on the factory floor, Elena Morales walked among the looms and cutting tables with her clipboard and her hard-won authority, proving with every inspection and every decision that competence had no gender. Justice, she realized, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just the quiet satisfaction of work well done and doors that stayed open for the women who came after. But that evening, as Elena picked up Rosalind from after-school care, she noticed something had changed. The nuns greeted her warmly, Other mothers nodded in acknowledgement, and the older girls who'd tormented Rosalind with their parents' gossip suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a narrative that had shifted beneath their feet. "Miss Elena," one of the nuns called out, "we read the article about you in the Tribune. The girls are quite impressed." Rosalind looked up at her mother with shining eyes, and Elena understood that this, protecting her daughter's faith in goodness, showing her that standing up for what's right sometimes actually worked. This was the victory that mattered most. Could one woman's courage change an entire city's understanding of what was possible? Not alone, but as the beginning of something larger than herself. Yes. Christmas came to Tampa with all the subtlety of a whisper. No snow, no biting cold, just a softening of the brutal heat and strings of colored lights appearing on palm trees, like tropical jewelry. Elena Morales had been at Palmetto Manufacturing for 5 months, and the company had posted its most profitable quarter in 3 years. But profit wasn't what brought Victor Castellano to Elena's small rental house on the evening of December 23, 1970, carrying a manila envelope that felt heavier than its actual weight. Rosalind answered the door wearing a red velvet dress that was slightly too big, clearly purchased with room to grow. Her hair was pulled back with a green ribbon, and she held a wooden spoon covered in cookie dough. "Mr. Castellano!" she exclaimed with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd learned that some adults could be trusted. "We're making Christmas cookies. Do you want to help?" "Maybe in a minute, sweetheart. Is your mother home?" Elena appeared from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands onto an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook," in fading letters. The house smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, and a small aluminum Christmas tree sat in the corner of the living room, decorated with handmade ornaments and a handful of glass bulbs that had probably belonged to Elena's mother or grandmother, the kind of decorations that carried history in their chips and faded colors. "Victor," Elena said, surprise and something like concern crossing her face. "Is everything all right? Did something happen at the factory?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. He held up the envelope. "I need to talk to you about something. Can we sit?" They settled at Elena's small kitchen table while Rosalind returned to her cookie-cutting station, using a star-shaped cutter to create dozens of identical shapes from the rolled dough. The kitchen was cramped but meticulously clean, everything in its place, the kind of space that reflected limited resources stretched through careful management. Castellano set the envelope on the table between them. "5 months ago," he began, "you saved my sister's life. And then you walked into my office and turned out to be the most competent quality control supervisor Palmetto has ever had. These two facts exist separately, but they've been tangled together in my mind since the day you collapsed in our courtyard." Elena's expression was guarded. "Victor, if this is about gratitude again..." "It's about justice," he interrupted gently, "and about making sure that sacrifice is honored not just with words, but with security." He pushed the envelope toward her. "Open it." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the flap and pulled out the contents. A deed of sale, legal documents, and a set of keys on a simple metal ring. "I don't understand," she said, scanning the papers with growing confusion. "There's a house," Castellano explained. 3 bedrooms on Valencia Street in Hyde Park. Good neighborhood, good schools. The owner was relocating to Atlanta and needed to sell quickly. I bought it 2 months ago, and as of this afternoon, the title has been transferred into your name." The color drained from Elena's face. "You bought me a house?" "I bought you a house that you'll pay for through a very reasonable mortgage. Interest-free, Payments deducted from your salary over the next 20 years. The down payment has been covered, and the monthly cost is less than you're currently paying for this rental. Elena stared at the deed as if it might vanish if she looked away. Victor, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, he said quietly. Elena, my sister is alive because you gave away a piece of yourself when you had almost nothing. You were drowning in debt and grief, and you still chose generosity over self-preservation. How do I repay that? How do I look at Maria's children and know they exist because of your sacrifice, and not try to give you something that represents security? You've already given me a job, respect, the chance to prove myself, and you've earned all of that through your work. This isn't about the job. This is about the kidney. Castellano leaned forward, his voice intense. For 5 years, I've carried the weight of an unpayable debt. I've watched my sister live and thrive, and I've known that somewhere out there was a woman who'd made that possible. Now that I've found you, now that I know your name and your daughter's name and the way you take your coffee, now I have the chance to honor that sacrifice with something tangible. Please, please let me do this. Rosalind had stopped cutting cookies and was watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. She understood enough to know something important was happening, but not enough to grasp the full weight of the moment. Elena's tears came silently, tracking through the flour dust on her cheeks. I didn't donate my kidney for payment, she whispered. I did it because it was right. Because someone needed help, and I could give it. I know, and that's exactly why you deserve this. The logic of grace, that those who gave without expecting return were precisely the ones who should receive without having to ask. Elena looked down at the deed, at the address printed in official typeface, at the keys that represented walls and a roof and a yard where Rosalind could play, without worrying about landlords or eviction notices. She thought about Roberto, who'd worked himself into exhaustion trying to build security for their family. She thought about the kidney she'd given, the piece of herself that lived on in Maria Castellano's body, filtering blood and sustaining life. She thought about Rosalind, who deserved stability and space and a childhood that wasn't defined by precariousness. Can we see it? Rosalind asked, her small voice breaking the tension. The house? Can we go look at it? Castellano smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. I have the keys right here. The house on Valencia Street was a modest bungalow with a wide front porch and a live oak tree in the yard that must have been 100 years old. In the dusk light, with Christmas decorations glowing in neighboring windows, it looked like something from a dream. Solid, permanent, real. Elena stood on the sidewalk, unable to move, unable to process that this house with its sturdy brick foundation and fresh white paint belonged to her. Rosalind had no such hesitation. She raced up the front walk, her too big dress flapping around her legs, and stood on the porch waiting impatiently for someone to unlock the door. Mama, come on, I want to see my room! Inside, the house was empty but clean, hardwood floors gleaming in the fading light. There was a living room with built-in bookshelves, a kitchen with yellow countertops and new appliances, 3 bedrooms, and, most miraculous of all, a small office with a window that overlooked the backyard. This could be your room, Castellano said to Rosalind, showing her the smallest bedroom. And this one could be your mother's, and this one. He opened the door to the 3rd bedroom, revealing a space that was smaller but filled with afternoon light. This could be a guest room or a study or whatever you need it to be. Rosalind was already planning, her child's imagination transforming empty space into kingdoms. My bed could go here, and my dolls could have their own shelf. And maybe we could paint the walls pink. Can we paint them pink, Mama? Elena couldn't speak. She stood in the doorway of this house that was somehow hers, this miracle built from bricks and gratitude, and felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. Castellano touched her shoulder gently. Elena, are you all right? I spent 5 years believing that sacrifice was its own reward, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That doing the right thing meant accepting whatever consequences came with it. But this, she gestured at the house, at Rosalind examining the closet space, at the solid proof that goodness could sometimes be rewarded. This feels like the universe saying I mattered, that what I gave wasn't just taken and forgotten. You mattered, Castellano said firmly. You mattered to Maria. You matter to Palmetto Manufacturing. You matter to every woman who sees what you've accomplished and believes she might accomplish something too. And you matter to me, because you showed me that the most important debts are the ones we can never fully repay. We can only try to honor them by passing on the grace we've received. They stood together in the empty house as dusk deepened into night, as Christmas lights flickered on across the neighborhood, as Rosalind's excited exploration created echoes in the unfurnished rooms. When can we move in? Elena asked. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, if you want. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Then it'll be the best Christmas present you've ever received. Elena laughed through her tears, the sound bright and unburdened. The second best. Rosalind was born on Christmas Eve 7 years ago. Nothing will ever top that. But as they locked up the house and drove back through Tampa's holiday-lit streets, Elena understood that some gifts came disguised as interruptions, that some debts created bonds stronger than blood, and that sacrifice, real sacrifice, had a way of circling back in unexpected forms. That night, after Rosalind had finally fallen asleep with visions of pink walls and her own room dancing in her dreams, Elena stood at the window of her rental house and thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. From widow to donor, from desperate to employed, from invisible to essential. She thought about Roberto, who'd wanted so badly to give her security and had died before he could. She thought about Maria Castellano, alive and teaching and raising children, because Elena had chosen generosity over fear. She thought about Victor, who'd learned that the people we owe the most are often the ones we'd never have noticed without fate's intervention. And she thought about the house on Valencia Street, waiting for them with its empty rooms and infinite possibility. Some stories, Elena realized, didn't end with tragedy or triumph. They ended with transformation, with the quiet miracle of having enough, of being seen, of knowing that your life had mattered to someone beyond yourself. Could a kidney donation purchase a house? Could sacrifice be measured in square footage and mortgage payments? No. But love could be expressed that way. Gratitude could take the form of keys and deeds, and sometimes the universe balanced its accounts in ways that looked suspiciously like justice. The next morning, Christmas Eve 1970, Elena and Rosalind packed their modest belongings and moved into the house on Valencia Street, beginning the next chapter of a story that had started with loss and been rewritten into grace. 23 years later, on a warm October afternoon in 1993, Rosalind Morales stood in the offices of Palmetto Manufacturing, now Palmetto Industries, a company that had expanded into 5 southeastern states, and listened to her mother give the speech that would close one chapter and open another. Elena was 65 now, her dark hair silvered, her face lined with the evidence of a life fully lived, but her posture was still straight, her voice still clear. and her eyes still held that fierce determination that had carried her through poverty, loss, and the slow, difficult work of breaking down doors that had been closed for generations. When I started at this company in 1970, Elena said, addressing the gathered employees and guests, I was told, sometimes to my face, often behind my back, that I didn't belong here, that a woman had no place supervising men, that my presence was political theater rather than professional merit. Rosalind watched from the side of the room, pride swelling in her chest. She was 30 years old now, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on employment discrimination cases. She'd built her career on the foundation her mother had laid, fighting battles that Elena had made possible by fighting her own. But I was fortunate, Elena continued, to work for a man who understood that debt and gratitude could coexist with respect and high standards. Victor Castellano didn't hire me because I donated a kidney that saved his sister's life. He hired me despite almost not hiring me, and then he let my work speak for itself. The audience laughed softly, and Castellano, now 66, recently retired himself but still serving on the board, smiled from his seat in the front row. Beside him sat Maria, gray-haired and elegant, still teaching biology, still living the life that Elena's sacrifice had purchased. I'm retiring today, Elena said, after 23 years as Director of Quality Operations, and I'm proud to announce that my replacement has been chosen not because of gender or politics or anything except merit and vision. Please welcome your new Director of Quality Operations, Jennifer Chen. The room erupted in applause as a young woman in her 30s, sharp-eyed, confident, the daughter of immigrants who'd built their own American dream, stepped forward to shake Elena's hand. The torch being passed from one barrier breaker to the next, the work of progress continuing beyond any single person's tenure. After the ceremony, after the cake had been cut, and the speeches had been made and the crowd had thinned, the original small family gathered in Castellano's old office. Victor and Maria, Elena and Rosalind, and two additions that represented the fullness of time's passage. Carolina Castellano Thompson, Maria's daughter, was now 25 and working as a pediatric nurse. Michael Castellano was 23 and teaching high school biology alongside his mother. Both of them owed their existence to a choice Elena had made when they were impossibilities rather than people. I want to show you something, Maria said, pulling out a worn leather journal. I've kept this since the transplant. Every important moment of my life for the past 28 years, I've written a note to you, Elena. Even when I didn't know your name, even when I thought I'd never meet you. She opened the journal to a random page, dated March 15, 1970. Today I gave birth to my son, Michael. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with his father's eyes and my stubborn chin. When they placed him in my arms, I thought about you, the woman who made this moment possible. I thought about how you're carrying your own child somewhere, raising her alone, probably working too hard and sleeping too little. I wish I could tell you that your sacrifice created this, that every breath my son takes is proof that goodness echoes forward in ways we can never predict. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Elena's tears came freely now, and Rosalind moved to her mother's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Mama, you never told me she wrote to you. I didn't know, Elena whispered. Maria, all these years I've been documenting what your gift made possible, Maria said. Every birthday, every graduation, every ordinary Tuesday, when I woke up grateful to be alive. I want you to have this. I want you to see what you created. She pressed the journal into Elena's hands. The weight of a life. measured in ink and gratitude. That evening, the extended family gathered at the house on Valencia Street, the house that Elena had paid off years ago, that had sheltered Rosalind through childhood and adolescence, that had hosted countless dinners and holidays and moments of ordinary grace. The live oak in the courtyard had grown thicker, its branches now hanging low enough for Maria's grandchildren to climb. Because time had continued its forward march, and Maria's children had grown and married and started families of their own. Carolina's daughter, 3-year-old Elena, named for the woman who'd made her grandmother's life possible, chased fireflies in the yard while the adults gathered on the porch with sweet tea and the comfortable silence of people who'd become family, not through blood, but through choice and consequence. "Do you ever regret it?" Carolina asked Elena suddenly. "Giving away your kidney? Knowing the health problems it caused you later?" Elena was quiet for a moment, watching little Elena, her namesake, laugh with unself-conscious joy. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "I regret the limitations it created, the extra doctor visits, the way my body has struggled, but regret the choice itself? Never. Because I look at your mother, alive and thriving. I look at you and your brother and your children. I see this web of life that exists because I said yes when I could have said no. How could I regret that?" "That's the difference between cost and price," Rosalind added, her lawyer's mind always parsing meaning. "The cost was your kidney and your health, but the price, the actual value received, was immeasurable." Castellano raised his glass of tea. "To Elena Morales, who taught me that the most important things we do are the things we do when no one's watching, when there's no reward except knowing we've chosen right over easy." They drank to that. This unlikely family forged from emergency and sacrifice and the strange mathematics of grace. As the sun set over Tampa, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that had witnessed decades of change, women in boardrooms now, instead of just typing pools, barriers broken and rebuilt and broken again, progress measured in inches and miles. Elena felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. She'd lost a husband and a kidney. She'd gained a career, a home, a found family, and the knowledge that her suffering had purchased joy for people she'd never expected to know. Not a bad trade, all things considered. Years later, after Elena had passed peacefully at 73, her remaining kidney finally giving out, but her legacy secured in the lives she'd touched and the doors she'd opened. Rosalind would find a letter her mother had written to be opened after her death. It read simply, "My darling Rosie, when you were 7 years old, you burst into a man's office to save my life. You were brave when I couldn't be, strong when I was weak, and you showed me that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the chance to see us be vulnerable and human. I've spent my life trying to teach you that sacrifice has meaning, that kindness echoes forward, that the choices we make in moments of crisis define us more than the easy decisions we make when everything is comfortable. You've learned those lessons and built a life defending people who can't defend themselves. You've become the kind of woman I always hoped you'd be, fierce, compassionate, uncompromising in your pursuit of justice. The house on Valencia Street is yours now. Fill it with love and argument and the messy, beautiful work of living fully. And remember, we don't get to choose what life takes from us, but we do get to choose what we do with what remains. I love you forever, Mama." And in the margins of that letter, in Rosalind's careful handwriting, a simple addition: "Lesson learned, legacy honored, doors held open for those who come after." If this story moved you, Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed someone's small act of kindness create ripples far beyond what they imagined? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us that the most extraordinary lives are often built from ordinary moments of choosing courage over comfort. They say that on certain October evenings in Tampa, when the light hits Valencia Street just right, you can still see a little girl in a yellow dress running up a walkway toward a house that represented everything her mother fought for, and that the live oak tree in that yard grew strong from roots fed by sacrifice, watered by tears, and sheltered by a love that refused to be measured in anything as simple as blood or money.